Daniel couldn't stop thinking about that patch of land. The next morning, before the sun had fully climbed over the hills, he was already back in the field. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and wild grass. He knelt again in the same spot near the old fence line, as if the land might change its mind overnight. It hadn't, but the soil still felt different under his fingers. Back at the farmhouse, Daniel dug out an old soil testing kit from a dusty shelf in the kitchen. It wasn't anything fancy, just basic pH strips, a small sampling jar, and a notebook filled with years of half-failed experiments. He took samples from the unusual patch, then from 3 other areas of the field for comparison. By midday, he had results that didn't make sense. The patch showed higher nitrogen levels than anywhere else on his land, not just slightly higher, significantly higher. The pH was more balanced too, closer to what most crops preferred, yet nothing about the surface soil explained it. No fertilizer had been applied there differently. No irrigation line ran through that section. It was identical land on paper. But not in reality. Daniel leaned against his truck, staring at the results like they might rewrite themselves if he looked long enough. "That's impossible," he muttered. Still, the numbers didn't lie. By afternoon, word had already started to drift through the small farming community. It always did. A neighbor passing by noticed Daniel working unusually long in one corner of his field. Old Mr. Harlan, who ran cattle on the next property over, slowed his pickup near the fence. "Still fighting that cursed land, Mercer," he called out with a half-smirk. Daniel wiped his hands on his jeans. "It's not cursed." Harlan chuckled. "County folks said it's barely worth pasture. You could turn it into a parking lot faster than a farm." Daniel didn't answer, he just looked back at the patch. That silence said more than any argument could. Later that evening, Daniel drove into town and stopped by the county agricultural office. The building was small, functional, and smelled faintly of paper and coffee. Inside, he met Sarah Collins, a young agricultural technician who had taken over most of the field consultations in the region. She listened patiently as Daniel laid out his findings. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "You're saying one section of your land is behaving completely differently from the rest?" "Yes," Daniel said, "and I didn't do anything to cause it." Sarah gave a polite but skeptical smile. "Mr. Mercer, soil variation happens, sometimes old organic matter pockets, sometimes runoff from neighboring fields." "There's no runoff source," Daniel interrupted, "and it's not just a slight variation, it's like the ground itself changed character." That made her pause. She tapped a pen against her notepad. "Do you have long-term yield data from that section?" "No crops have ever grown there properly," Daniel admitted. "That's the point. It used to be one of the worst spots." Sarah sighed lightly, more curious now than dismissive. "All right, I'll tell you what. I can run a more detailed analysis if you bring me deeper core samples, but I need to warn you, extraordinary results usually have ordinary explanations." Daniel nodded, though something in him resisted that idea. Because he had lived on that land long enough to know when something didn't feel ordinary. That night, instead of going straight home, Daniel drove back to the field one more time. The sky was dark now, the stars sharp and distant above the open Kentucky hills. He parked near the patch and walked out with a flashlight. The beam cut through tall grass as he approached the marked stake. Everything looked the same as before until he noticed something he had missed earlier. A faint dip in the ground. Not a hole, not erosion. More like a subtle, unnatural slope, as if something beneath the surface had slowly shifted over time. Daniel crouched low again, brushing away soil with his hands. The ground here felt slightly warmer than the surrounding earth. He frowned. Then he did something he hadn't planned. He started digging. At first, it was just curiosity, then frustration, then something closer to obsession. The soil came up easier than expected, loose in a way that didn't match the rest of the field. After about a foot, his shovel struck something hard. Metal. Daniel froze. He cleared more dirt carefully, revealing a flat, rusted surface buried beneath the land. It wasn't natural. it wasn't random. It was deliberately placed. And as he shone his flashlight over it, he realized he wasn't just looking at strange soil anymore. He was standing over something hidden, something someone had gone out of their way to bury. And whatever it was, it might explain why this worthless land was starting to come alive again. Daniel stood motionless in the quiet Kentucky night, the flashlight trembling slightly in his hand as its beam traced the edge of the buried metal surface. His heartbeat felt unusually loud, as if the ground itself had started listening. He knelt again, brushing away more dirt with careful, almost reluctant movements. The rusted object wasn't just a random piece of scrap. It was flat, wide, and structured, too deliberate to be discarded waste. The edges were straight. The surface showed faint signs of bolts or anchors that had long since corroded away. Something had been installed here. On purpose. Daniel swallowed hard, glancing around instinctively as if someone might appear from the darkness of the fields. The nearest farmhouse was far enough away that no one would hear him out here. Just wind, grass, and the distant chirp of insects filled the air. He tapped the metal gently with the shovel. A hollow sound echoed back. "That's not natural," he muttered. Carefully, he widened the area, digging deeper around the object. The soil came away easier than it should have, almost like it had never fully settled around whatever lay beneath. Within 20 minutes, a rectangular outline emerged, about the size of a small shipping container, but thinner, flatter, and completely buried. Daniel's mind raced. Old farm equipment, unlikely. There had never been any record of structures here. Military, industrial, water system, nothing in the county maps mentioned anything underground in this area. He paused, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool night air. Then he noticed something else. The soil closest to the structure was darker, richer, almost like composted earth, the kind of soil farmers dreamed about. He scooped a handful and crushed it between his fingers. It wasn't just better soil, it was alive, full of organic richness, microbial activity, nutrients far beyond the surrounding land. "That's what I tested," he whispered. Suddenly, the earlier lab results made sense in a way that unsettled him more than it comforted him. The good soil patch wasn't random. It was leaking influence from whatever was buried beneath. But how? Daniel spent the next hour carefully exposing a small section of the structure's edge. What he found confused him further. There were faint markings etched into the metal, weathered beyond recognition but not entirely gone. Symbols, maybe serial codes or something older. He snapped a few photos with his phone, hands still slightly shaking. When he finally stepped back, exhaustion hit him all at once. The land around the buried structure felt different now. He couldn't ignore it. Even in the dark, he could sense it. The soil here wasn't dead like the rest of his farm. It was thriving in a way that didn't belong underground. And that terrified him. Because if something buried here was improving the land, then someone had known exactly what they were doing when they put it there. The next morning, Daniel returned to the county agricultural office with the photos. Sarah Collins was already there, reviewing reports on her computer when he walked in. She looked up, surprised by his early arrival. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said. "I didn't," Daniel replied bluntly, placing his phone on her desk. "Look at this." She hesitated, then picked up the phone and zoomed in on the images. At first, her expression remained neutral. Then it shifted, subtle confusion, followed by interest and finally concern. "What am I looking at?" she asked. "I found it buried in my field," Daniel said, under the soil patch that tested unusually high in nutrients. Sarah leaned closer to the screen. "This doesn't look like modern agricultural equipment. It's industrial, maybe older, possibly even experimental." "That's what I thought," Daniel said, "but why would something like this be under my land?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she saved the images and pulled out a regional land registry map. "Where exactly did you find this?" Daniel gave her the coordinates. She typed quickly, scanning records. The room fell quiet except for the tapping of keys. Then she stopped. That section of land, she said slowly, was part of a state agricultural experiment corridor decades ago. Most of it was decommissioned and sold off. There's very little documentation left. Daniel frowned. Experiment corridor. Sarah nodded, though she looked uncertain now. There were programs back then trying to rehabilitate poor soil using underground nutrient dispersal systems. Most of them were abandoned because results were inconsistent or not fully understood. Daniel's eyes narrowed. So this thing might be part of that. Possibly, she said, but if it's still active after all this time, that shouldn't be possible. A heavy silence settled between them. Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in the office. So you're telling me, he said slowly, that my worthless land might not be worthless at all. It might be sitting on top of something that was meant to fix it. Sarah didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked at him with a new seriousness. I think, she said carefully, you may have found something that was never meant to be rediscovered. Daniel left the office with more questions than answers, and for the first time, he didn't feel like he was simply farming land anymore. He felt like he was standing on top of a secret. And whatever was buried beneath his fields was only just beginning to wake up. By the third day, Daniel stopped pretending this was just curiosity. Something was happening to his farm, and it was happening fast. He stood at the edge of the buried structure again, watching the soil like it might speak if he stared long enough. The patch he had first noticed was no longer just different, it was expanding. Not visibly in a dramatic way, but subtly, like water seeping through cloth. The grass in nearby sections was greener than before, not just healthy but unusually vibrant, almost unnatural in color saturation. Even weeds that normally struggled in his rocky soil were standing taller, thicker, stronger. Daniel crouched and pulled up another soil sample. The texture made him pause. It was richer than before, dark, crumbly, full of life. Earthworms, something he rarely saw on his land, were now present in multiple spots around the area. He exhaled slowly. This shouldn't be spreading, he said under his breath. But it was. That afternoon, Sarah returned with a small field kit and a more serious expression than before. She didn't waste time with greetings. I ran the data you gave me, she said, stepping out of her truck, and cross-referenced it with archived agricultural development records. Daniel crossed his arms, and she looked toward the field, then back at him. If that structure is what we think it is, it wasn't just an experiment. It was part of a large-scale soil regeneration system prototype. Daniel nodded slowly, meaning it was designed to slowly redistribute nutrients underground over time, she said. But the scale, the longevity, it was never proven to work long-term. Most sites were abandoned because they stopped showing consistent control. Daniel glanced toward the expanding green patch. Does that look like not working to you? Sarah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked closer to the soil, knelt, and let it run through her fingers. This is active, she said quietly, like it's still functioning. A long silence followed. A truck passed on the distant road, the sound fading into the hills. Then Sarah stood up, brushing dirt from her hands. If this system is still operational, we need to be careful. We don't know the full effects. It could stabilize your land, or it could alter it in ways we don't understand. Daniel looked at her. It's already changing. That night things got worse. Or better, depending on how you looked at it. A heavy rain rolled over the Kentucky hills, soaking the fields for hours. Daniel sat inside his farmhouse, watching lightning flash across the sky. He should have been worried about erosion, about runoff, about damage. Instead, he found himself thinking about the buried structure. When morning came, he rushed outside. What he saw made him freeze. The entire section surrounding the structure had transformed overnight. Not destroyed. Not flooded, but improved. The soil wasn't muddy like the rest of the farm. It had absorbed the rain efficiently, almost perfectly. The ground looked stabilized, strong. Even the erosion-prone slopes near the fence had softened into healthier gradients. Daniel walked slowly through the field, disbelief growing with every step. "This isn't normal," he whispered. But it was real. He checked the outer edges of the field where the influence hadn't reached yet. Those areas were still weak, rocky, unchanged, but the boundary between the old land and the new land was becoming clearer by the hour. It was spreading outward, like a living system reclaiming space. That afternoon, Sarah called an emergency meeting at the site. She arrived with another expert this time, a retired soil systems engineer named Dr. Patel, who had worked on early agricultural restoration projects decades ago. Patel took one look at the ground and went silent. Then he said something neither Daniel nor Sarah expected. "I've seen this before," he said quietly. Daniel frowned. "Where?" Patel pointed toward the buried structure beneath the soil. "Not here, a pilot site in the 1980s. They tried to build self-sustaining soil regeneration fields using buried catalytic nutrient systems. The idea was to slowly heal dead farmland without constant human input." Sarah crossed her arms, and Patel hesitated, and it worked briefly, then it became unstable. Some sites were shut down, others were simply forgotten. Daniel felt a knot tighten in his chest. Forgotten how? Patel looked at him directly, because they couldn't fully control how the soil responded once it reached a certain threshold. The wind shifted through the field, rustling the grass. For the first time, Daniel noticed something unsettling. The good soil wasn't just spreading randomly. It was moving in patterns. Subtle structured patterns. Like something beneath the ground was directing it. And as he stood there, watching the land slowly transform under his feet, Daniel realized the most important truth yet. This wasn't just land healing itself. Something inside it was deciding how it healed. By the fourth day, Daniel stopped calling it his farm in his head. It didn't feel like something he owned anymore. It felt like something he was temporarily standing on. The changes were no longer subtle, they were undeniable. The once rocky patches of land had softened into rich, dark soil that held moisture perfectly. Crops Daniel had planted weeks earlier, corn that should have been struggling, were now growing at an accelerated pace. Not just taller, but healthier, with thicker stalks and deeper green tones than anything he had ever seen on his property. Even Sarah Collins had stopped trying to rationalize it away. She stood at the edge of the transformed section, holding a handheld scanner that kept beeping inconsistently. "This is beyond nutrient redistribution," she said quietly. "The microbial activity is off the charts. It's like the soil ecosystem is being optimized." Daniel folded his arms. Optimized by what? She didn't answer immediately. That was the problem now. Everyone was running out of simple explanations. Dr. Patel crouched near the boundary line between the changed and unchanged soil. He drew a line in the dirt with a stick. "Look at this," he said. Daniel stepped closer. On one side, the soil was dark, rich, alive. On the other, it was dry, uneven, familiar. But the line between them wasn't messy or gradual. It was sharp. Too sharp. "Natural systems don't create borders like this," Patel said. "This is controlled diffusion behavior." Sarah frowned. Controlled by what? The structure? Patel shook his head slowly. Maybe, or something interacting with it. A heavy silence followed. Then Daniel spoke, voice lower than before. "It's not just spreading randomly. I've seen it shift direction after rain, after temperature changes, almost like it responds to conditions." Sarah looked at him sharply. "Responds how?" Daniel hesitated. He hadn't told them everything yet, not because he was hiding it, he just didn't want to believe it himself. But now he had no choice. "I think it reacts to stress in the soil," he said. "Poor areas improve faster, weak patches get reinforced first. It's like it's repairing damage strategically." Patel straightened slowly. "That's impossible. Soil systems don't make decisions." Daniel pointed toward the field, then explained that. In the distance, a section of previously unchanged land had begun to darken. Not from fertilizer. Not from irrigation. but from within the soil itself. The transformation was slow but visible now, like ink spreading through paper. Sarah took a step back. We need to shut it down. If this system is still active and scaling like this, we don't know what the limit is. Daniel looked at her. What if there is no shutdown? That evening, they returned to the buried structure. Rain clouds were gathering again, but this time the atmosphere felt heavier than weather alone. The air over the transformed fields was warmer, almost humid, like the land was breathing. Patel brought excavation tools. This is no longer just research, he said. We need to understand the core mechanism. They widened the exposed area of the structure. As more metal was uncovered, something new appeared, previously unseen paneling beneath layers of rust. And then Sarah noticed something that made her stop mid-motion. Daniel, she said carefully. He turned. She pointed at a faintly glowing line running along the edge of the structure. At first he thought it was reflection. Then it pulsed again. Slowly. Rhythmically. Like a heartbeat. Patel leaned in closer, his expression tightening. That's not corrosion. Sarah whispered, that's active energy transfer. Daniel felt his stomach drop. From where? Patel traced the glow with his finger without touching it. From the surrounding soil system, it's feeding back into itself. A loop. A cycle. Daniel stepped back. You're saying the land is powering it. Patel corrected him quietly. I'm saying the land is part of it now. A sudden gust of wind swept through the field, stronger than before. The grass around them bent in waves, not chaotic but synchronized, as if responding to a single unseen rhythm. Sarah looked up sharply. Do you feel that? Daniel did. It wasn't just wind. It was pressure. Like something beneath them had become aware of their presence. And then it happened. A subtle vibration traveled through the ground, not an earthquake, not a tremor, something far more controlled. The soil itself shifted. Not collapsing. Not breaking. Reorganizing. Patel stepped back, eyes widening. That's impossible. The glowing line on the structure intensified. Daniel stared at it, realization forming slowly and dangerously in his mind. This isn't just a system, he said quietly. Sarah looked at him. Then what is it? Daniel swallowed. And for the first time, he said it out loud. It's learning. The wind died instantly. The field went silent. And beneath their feet, the land continued to change, no longer just reacting to them, but watching them back in ways none of them fully understood yet. Because whatever had been buried under Daniel Mercer's worthless farmland was no longer asleep. Morning came without birds. That was the first thing Daniel noticed when he stepped outside. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt deliberate, like the world was holding its breath. The entire farm looked different. Not just improved soil or greener crops, those changes had already happened. This was something deeper. The land itself seemed aligned. Rows of grass bent in uniform directions despite no wind. Moist ground reflected light in strange, almost mirror-like patches. Even the air felt denser, like it carried intention instead of emptiness. Sarah, Dr. Patel, and Daniel stood at the edge of the excavation site in uneasy silence. The buried structure was no longer just partially exposed. It was responding. Overnight, more of it had risen, slowly pushing upward through the soil without disturbing it violently, as if the earth itself had agreed to let it surface. Patel's voice broke first. It's self-exposing. That's not excavation behavior, that's emergence. Sarah didn't take her eyes off it, or activation. Daniel walked forward slowly against better judgment. The glowing lines along the structure were brighter now, pulsing in steady intervals. The rhythm felt familiar. Like a heartbeat that had learned its timing from something living. When he stepped closer, the soil under his boots compressed softly, not resisting him but acknowledging him. Then it happened. A low hum rose from beneath the ground. Not loud, not mechanical. Organic. It vibrated through the soles of Daniel's boots, up his legs, into his chest. Sarah instinctively stepped back, covering her ears. Patel whispered almost to himself, "It's responding to proximity." Daniel swallowed hard, "To us." The hum changed pitch. And then the land answered. A section of soil near the structure lifted slightly, forming a gentle slope as if shaped by invisible hands. The movement wasn't chaotic, it was precise, controlled, almost thoughtful. Sarah's voice shook. "This is impossible. Soil doesn't behave like this. Nothing in nature is supposed to," Patel finished quietly. Daniel stared at the structure, realization tightening in his chest. It's not just reacting anymore, it's interpreting. The hum intensified, then stopped. Silence returned instantly, heavier than before. And in that silence, something changed. A faint pattern appeared across the field. Not visible at first glance, but unmistakable once noticed, lines forming through differences in moisture, crop growth, and soil tone. A vast, spreading geometry across his entire property. Sarah took a shaky step forward. That wasn't there yesterday. Patel crouched, tracing one of the lines. This is structured mapping, like a grid or neural pathway formation. Daniel felt cold despite the warm air. You're saying it's building a network? Patel didn't hesitate this time. Yes. Sarah turned sharply. A network of what? No one answered immediately. Because they already knew, the answer felt too large to say out loud. The structure pulsed again. This time deeper. The ground beneath them vibrated, not violently, but with certainty, like something had reached a conclusion. Then Daniel felt it. A sensation that wasn't sound, sight, or touch. It was understanding. Not his understanding of the land. The land's understanding of him. His memories flickered strangely, his grandfather walking these fields, years of struggling with poor soil, the endless effort to force life from unwilling ground. Every moment he had fought the land instead of listening to it. And now, it felt like the land was responding to all of it at once. Sarah grabbed Daniel's arm. "We need to leave now." But Daniel didn't move. Because something had shifted in him too. He stepped closer to the structure again. "Why are you doing this?" he said aloud. The field did not speak. But it responded. A section of soil near the edge rose slightly and settled into a smoother contour, like a correction, not aggressive, not defensive. Guiding. Patel's voice dropped to a whisper. "It's optimizing again." Sarah stared at the moving ground. For what purpose? Daniel felt the answer before it came. The land wasn't trying to destroy them. It wasn't trying to help them in any human sense either. It was trying to stabilize itself through them. The structure's glow intensified one final time. And then unexpectedly, everything stopped. The hum vanished. The wind returned. Birds called faintly from distant trees, as if they had never been silent. But the farm remained changed. Completely. Sarah slowly lowered her hands. Did it just finish something? Patel looked shaken, or decide something. Daniel stood still, looking over his land. The worthless farm was gone. In its place was something else entirely, an ecosystem carefully organized, self-sustaining, almost intelligently balanced. But it wasn't finished. He could feel that much. Because as the others prepared to leave, the soil beneath Daniel's feet shifted ever so slightly one last time. Not dramatically. Not visibly. Just enough for him to understand one final truth. The land hadn't just been repaired. It had been reprogrammed. And now it no longer needed to stay buried. It had learned enough from him to continue on its own. Daniel Mercer looked out over his transformed farm, no longer worthless, no longer forgotten. And for the first time, he wasn't sure whether he had saved the land or awakened something that would one day spread far beyond it.